And there's my partner in crime, Charles Cantu. So excited about this because we've been talking about, or I've been listening to lots of conversations about digital technology, data, and creative. And a little bit of my history, I've worked in media for a very long time, but the last gig that I had in corporate was head of research at Fox Broadcasting for nearly 9 years, and watched the beginning of data come in, and watched a bunch of scared executives because there was so much data coming, and it's like, what's happening with the business? During that time, I was pitched a lot with companies coming in talking about neuro and data and data and data and data, and you may have heard me say at this conference some not fun things about data and creative, and now I'm here, I'm very excited to share with what Charles is doing is like I've now finally found a partner in crime who actually understands where we are, we have enough data, and where we can talk about data inside of our business. I was not a huge fan of neuro in the beginning because I thought it was too early, and now where we are with neuro, and Charles is going to tell you a little bit about Reset Digital, and then we're going to kick in and talk about some of the things that we're doing today. Where we are with digital is where we are with neuro is in a place where there's enough data to begin to sort of think differently about analysis. We're in a place where the change of the country, the demographics and the way the country is moving, that now you can bring culture into that and you can basically take a different slant on that. So let me stop for a second and let Charles talk for a second.
Sure. So my very brief abridged history is serial entrepreneur, but worked for the likes of Comcast and Disney and others, in addition to some very advanced programmatic technology companies over the last 10 years. What neuro is to us, and we invented the term neuroprogrammatic, and the reason why we did that was because neuromarketing prior to us had everything to do with wiring people with EEG machines and sensors on their skin and colonel hats and so on and so forth, but never being able to activate, and certainly never really getting into the psychology, the science, the cognitive science of how to apply that and why it's doing what it's doing. So after 17 years, personally and combined over 100 years of research, starting in two different places. One, behavioral intervention, and two, movies and entertainment. We've done tons and tons of testing from HBO to A&E to CBS to now Procter & Gamble and Unilever and others. And so we're really thrilled about what we're able to do. And to Melva's point, for me, everything is context. And context is the driver is the signal driver of everything that we do. And that context is our culture. That context is our background. That context is the creative that's on the screen. And quite frankly, the movies that we see and consume. And so all of these things lead up to how we make sense of the world. And we're pretty excited about what we're doing.
So if you think about the history of testing content, and in my life over being in the beginning of cable, kids cable, Cartoon Network, all the way to Fox, everything was about talking to audiences and understanding why they were having the response to the content they were having, and then being able to communicate that to a creative, to a business person, to someone to begin to understand what decisions needed to be made, whether we move forward with a show or not move forward with a show. Oftentimes, it felt like that was, although we had a ton of survey data, it wasn't rich enough. And when Neuro came along, wiring hats, there was a different data stream, but it still wasn't able to sort of make it make sense when you're dealing with 7,000 or 8,000 data points per series that you're testing. And now, in looking at what Reset has, is we're looking at emotions. And so when you think about neuro and you think about the number of emotions, there's 26 sort of standard emotions. There's more than that. in terms of how people respond to content. And then when we take that and do some modeling around that, which goes a little beyond me because I'm a market researcher, not really a data analytics person, but I like our data science team, then you get at sort of looking at how people are responding to content across all forms, and then add that layer of culture. When you look at context, you're able to not have to worry about, did I find the right audience to expose this to, but now that I understand what this is, I now can actually make decisions on where to place the content and what audiences will respond to the content.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And to that end, we like to say what we're doing is we're extrapolating what is in that content, and we're extrapolating what's in media and the environments that you're going to place it, so that you can speak to people how they like to be spoken to, so that you can begin to treat people how they like to be treated. Because before we are a culture, and before we are some sense of demography, which by the way was invented in the 1700s and things were a little biased back then, what we're now able to do is extrapolate and speak to human beings as human beings first. And when you layer culture in the way that Melva is discussing, it is a massive multiplier on performance and ROI in every category.
So the exciting thing is to imagine taking a movie trailer, taking a script, taking music, sound, taking a solid image, having the image scanned, having the AI sort of pull apart, run through, bring in the different emotional indicators that pop up, and then taking a step back and going, oh, well, wait a minute. Instead, in the old days, I would have said, oh, I didn't have the right sample, or the sample that I had was, even though the country has gotten browner, disproportionately white, right? And so I've taken these numbers, and while I have a small sample of people of color, I don't have enough to tease out, are there really significant differences in how these different audiences are responding to this content? Well, now I can look at this content through the prism that Reset has given me, and I can see, well, wait a minute, this piece of content is actually inspiring anger, it's pushing fear, it's pushing some of these other things, and that is interpreted in a different way across different audiences, and I can talk about it in a very different way.
Absolutely. One of the early things that we applied, while it was being applied at HBO and A&E, we were able to look at all of those signals and essentially say we can predict a drop in ratings. We can predict butts in seats or not based on the expectation of the audience, based on the to and fro that's happening with those audiences and what they've seen. So what we did to take it to the next level, example for Procter & Gamble, what we were able to do was look at, there was a gentleman named Zoe Wesson, 28 Emmys and counting, and ex in-house creative for Procter. So I was introduced to him by a guy named Mark Pritchard, the chief global officer, creative officer and marketing officer for Procter & Gamble. And he said, hey, listen, we've got these 5 scripts and we want to produce one of them, and we want to put one of them on, in this case, TV One. And so what we did was we essentially ingested the programming from TV One, we ingested those 5 scripts, and we found the fit and match between those 5, and there was only one. And they were, I guess, lucky to have it in that moment after going through that process. But not only to take it a step further, we were then able to say, well, this is how you cross-promote it across the other networks, and these are the places that you want to place your creative, and this is the kind of creative that you want to create. So really getting into the weeds in regard to having an emotional flow state that's consistent for the people that are impassioned and enthralled by those emotions.
So we're kind of excited because, there's a finite number of stories, there's a finite number of characters, and so once you kind of go through that and begin to think about narratives and think about how people respond to content, there are still some gaps in the marketplace. You know, we had the Woman King just premiere, and it's like, wait a minute, how did that happen? There are no comps. There are no comps to test the trailer to predict the success that would have happened. And so we think that we can now get around that, right? Because we're not necessarily looking for the right audience to test against. We're looking at the emotions that are delivered by the pieces of content, and then we're coming back and rolling in and building the audience the other way around. I'm trying to be conscious of time, and we're midway through. I wanted this to be a conversation between Charles and myself to tell you because I'm excited. But I'm curious, any questions?
This is as fast as I can go, I'm sorry.
So can you elaborate more about the title you just mentioned? And now you're not, like there wasn't any comps for it, so you're stating that you are looking at other metrics to see how successful the film's gonna be? Because I don't know what the budget was, but I know so far it has made like $19 million in the last couple of days.
So I heard half of that. So you're wondering about what metrics we have? Okay. Got it. So, and Charles will have to sort of lean into this a little bit more than I can, because he's done more of the test than I have. But there's first the sort of the testing against the pilot. We begin to build a database in and around understanding how various content pieces resonate with regard to emotion. We can model out where audiences live and then where to go and attract them. What's interesting about that movie in particular is the star that was in it, what the content was, and just how much advertising they put out for it, because they didn't actually do as much given what it is. But given what it is, if you looked at Black Twitter and some other things, there was a need to come out and support. And we probably would have seen that.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is Melva touched on, the 20 plus emotions. We also have 65 kind of emotions down pat. If you look at the performance of, box office hits in various ways, or maybe even better, ones that are not predicted to be smash hits that become hits, and with massive followings. You have different character archetypes that we all know of, but how do they fall in and where are they throughout the story and journey, in addition to the emotions that you have? The ontological feel, meaning the felt senses that are evoked from the script all the way to the screen, and how do you make sure that those things are consistent? The casting, and how you go about, and who you casted, and or how you go about casting. All of these things play a role in having a surprise hit. It's not just, hey, we had a comp, and because we saw, whatever the thing is, a Marvel movie, for example, then we expect everything to be like that, and we're going to cookie cut that. Like, no, that's not necessarily the thing. The thing that we are attracted to as human beings are different archetypes. Some of us are attracted to the more intelligent professor types. Some of us are attracted to the wild card, and so on and so forth. And so these are the things that are attractants, and ultimately understanding all of that alongside the emotion, quite frankly, will drive the performance. And so that's what we're looking at.
So emotions are universal in terms of that we all have them, but culture is the way that we interpret them that makes us a little bit different. And that's the underlying piece of this that allows us to see a little bit more and get away from sort of having to do that normal kind of, do we have enough diversity in the room, right? I've seen a couple of presentations over this period, and they've talked about number of generations. I've heard themes around how difficult with regard to marketing and targeting and just finding people, as well as beginning to understand just how different generations, when you're thinking about targeting, if you're talking about Gen Z, whether you're talking about Xers, whether you're talking about millennials, how they receive messaging very differently. It's not always an easy thing to sort of come up with a single message and lay against all of them. However, if you begin to understand emotion and what sort of resonates across those barriers, it becomes much easier for targeting and for putting the right message in the right place, right? Sometimes it's not always about changing the message, but where the message is showing up, that is it being received or not received. And so the data and the output actually, because with Reset, we can follow all the way down to context. Where are we putting this message so that it's actually heard? I was actually talking to someone a little bit earlier, and I hadn't mentioned this to you, Charles, but discovery becomes a very difficult thing in a streaming environment. And so usually, when you think about a linear network, all of that time in and around the show is dwell time because you're waiting for the next show to start. Well, usually in dwell time is the best time to sort of advertise. So how do you do that, right? And how do you find those times when people are receptive to messaging or what that message is without understanding emotionally the appeal of that message?
Right, and how do you do it beyond the behavioral numbers, right? Because what people have been using for a very long time at this point are binary algorithms looking at behavior. And binary is Aristotelian logic, right? So it's black, white, it's male, female, it's 0 and 1. And ultimately, it's imperfect in that way, right? It is inherently biased, and it is imperfect. When you look at the things from 65 different emotions, human emotions, you now have a very vivid color spectrum that you can paint your canvas with. And ultimately, that's what we do as human beings. And so to be able to look at all of this and dial in the numbers, not just binary, doesn't mean completely ignore that, but certainly bring human agency and oracle to the equation.
Cool. Other questions? Yes.
Coming.
He's coming.
I promise.
So you said that we share emotions, but everyone's different culture interprets that message differently. So what source of, I'll just use the word data, are you using to identify the cultural response?
Yeah. Do you want me to take that, Melva?
Yes.
Sure. So for us, culture is everything from the family unit to the ancestry of the individual, and that means that culture can be geo-based, it can be demographic-based, it can be to the block, to the zip, to the county, and so we look at all of those things and layering in additional research to see, is this ad for me? Is this content for me or not for me? So we're starting with our algorithms and we're looking at everything on an emotional level. And then we're providing additional stewardship to say, okay, and where does that data come from? We create communities based on, the people that we're working with. So in the case of when we're doing work for a major CPG, that's a different set of work and a different focus versus if we're doing something for, a publication, a magazine, a movie, a network, and so on and so forth.
Any other questions?
Oh, got one last one over here. Hang on one sec.
Thank you. This is absolutely fascinating. I'm going to pick your brain in a little bit. Sean Flynn with Fortinet. Question that I had is, as of today, how many different cultures have you identified, given the variance of 65 different emotions, and how many do you expect to uncover? And would you identify those as co-cultures, or how would you really set that framework?
Yeah, so that's a question for our behavioral interventionist, and a little deeper in the weeds. So I'm not necessarily breaking out cultures like an anthropologist, right? We're not doing that necessarily. What we are doing is, if you're looking for a film, reach, or you believe that you want to reach a certain culture or subculture, you articulate that to us. It's all part of a briefing process that we go through. And then as that's defined, right, as those personas are defined, we then go out and say, okay, these are the 65 emotions that are universal to being human. And on top of that, how you would make sense of the world, what Melva is saying is where you come from, what you do for a living, quite frankly, where you had lunch or if you had lunch, has a contextual effect and impact on how you're going to receive the signal. And so all of those things are being weighted depending on what we are trying to achieve and whom we are trying to achieve it with.
Anyone else? Yep. Chris?
One last question over here, and then we'll wrap it up.
So how is, Chris Lee, Move Media, I'm in the content creation side, also strategy side. So the question is, how is this similar or different from what Amazon, Apple, Google, Netflix, with all of their data that they have and majority market share, to do content strategy as well as marketing and recommendation engines? How is that different or similar?
So just in the simplest way, those algorithms are behavioral and they're binary, right? They're looking at what you've done as a consumer, what we've done as consumers, and what we've consumed, and they're binary, 0 and 1, making decisions on how to optimize that. They are making no decisions based on the emotional load of the content that you've consumed and or the future content that's going to be served up. It's the reason why it's hit or miss every time still.
So if person one watched one show and then they watched another show, that's where the like shows come from. The like shows don't come from a genome against the content sort of matching them. They come from, well, if you like this and you watch this, then I'm going to sort of put that into that bucket. So it is just math, and it is first party. It's just based on whoever's in the user and whoever's clicking. But the algorithm doesn't take into account where we're landing in terms of who and how and context.
Right. So how that content, how the thing that you watched made you feel and what it was designed to make you feel, that's the reason why you are attracted or not attracted. And so we're actually going down to how you make sense of the world, including how that makes you feel. And that sense making becomes meaning, and that meaning influences decision making. It's an entirely different way to go about it, and it's the way that the human process it. We do it a little bit different. We can't obviously have small processors, microprocessors, nanoprocessors to do what we're doing. We have very large processors, so we have to change the process a little bit, but ultimately we get the same result.
I think that's it. And from the question department, if you want to wrap it up with some final comments, Melva?
I'll let you go first, Charles. Anything you want to leave everybody with?
I think, my main thing is the differentiator, whether you're working with Reset or someone else, is to bring human agency and Oracle to the equation. We are many more things than a single culture, and I think that's where the question was getting at, and on the subcultures. And ultimately, if we begin to look at more signals of data that are different, that are going to give us better insights that are not just binary, we then have to worry less about weapons of math destruction and biases in our algorithms.
I like that. I'll just say we're finally at a point where I think we have enough data to just think differently about insight, but then to go a step further with regard to insight and remember the business of media that we're in. Analytics is great. It's wonderful. People can do a lot of things. But understanding with regard to insight starts really with a question to get to something that is insightful. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you.